Welcome to the Creative Strings Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Howes, and today we are going to be learning from Cedric Easton, amazing musician, educator. He also considers himself, I would say, on a ministry. And we're going to hear clips from his album, his new album called Letters of a Broken Brother. And we're going to discuss practice, musical training, meaning for musicians, directions in music education, and a lot more. We're going to get into it in a real quick second. Before we do, I want to acknowledge our sponsor, Electric Violin Shop. They have been sponsoring the Creative Strings Podcast for a long time, and I love everybody at Electric Violin Shop. They are my go-to resource for all things electric strings, not just electric string instruments, but also any kind of accompanying gear, whether it's pedals or amps or whatever it might be. If you have any questions about gear, call them. Go to electricviolinshop.com and find their phone number and just call them during business hours. They will help you. A human will get on the phone. My guest today, Cedric, is also probably, I have to say honestly, objectively speaking, you are probably the friend in my life that I spend the most time in conversations with outside of people in my family. And I'm so grateful to you for your friendship and for our fascinating conversations. And while this one is structured for a podcast, I'm sure it's going to be fascinating and I'm going to learn a lot. I always learn from our conversations. I always learn from you. And I appreciate that our friendship and hopefully today will allow us to go deep into exchange, whether we agree or disagree on everything. But mostly I want to make this about you and illuminating and sharing your wisdom and inspiration with the world. So with that, Cedric, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate being able to be here and to be with your audience and in front of your audience. I should say again, because we worked together for so long, I feel like I've taken audience from the community that you've built a number of times, and it's always a joy. I don't play a stringed instrument, not very well. I don't play a stringed instrument very well, but I consider myself a part of the creative strings community. I'm in the rhythm section.
Yeah, but the new record, Letters of a Broken Brother, it's worth mentioning that this is an effort that you've done as a band leader, as a composer. You're singing, there's all these things on it. So your work in the musical arena is multifaceted and so deep. I feel like me as a string player and as a classically trained musician, I've learned so much from you because you come from different experiences and perspectives and expertises as a musician. But also there's so much that's just universal, I feel, for every musician. And I wanted to start with one of those things that I feel like really resonated for me. It was at one of our workshops and you were on Andy Reiner's podcast called River of Suck. And I encourage anybody to go hear that conversation on the River of Suck podcast with Andy Reiner that featured Cedric. But you told the story about your early training. And the reason I want to share it with my audience is because I would almost always tell people, if you're going to start music education, start early as possible. If you're a parent and you have a child, start your kid as early as possible. And I would say, get them private lessons. But you didn't have private lessons and you're an incredible world-class musician. So I just wonder if you'd be willing to share like a little bit about like your early training and how you became a musician.
Sure. My earliest training that I can remember, I guess, in a practical form, I remember being 6 playing, and I remember playing with the band, and it was a church band. And the reason I remember that so fondly is not because of the musicking itself, but more or less because I remember the conversation that the folks were having about me after that earliest memory, because I couldn't touch both of the pedals to play the drums. So I could only touch the kick drum pedal. That was a part of the conversation. And I remember that pretty vividly. They tell me that I was 4 when they realized that I could play or something like that. So I don't remember that at all. I don't remember that part, but I remember playing. And then I remember the first concert and competition that I remember being in, and the first wedding I played for all happened in the same year when I was 8. And I remember that pretty vividly as well. But I was surrounded by music quite a great deal. So let me back up. Both of my parents were musicians, largely in church. My father's a pastor, and he played drums with a guy you may know from Columbus, Ohio. There was a guy named Bill Mason many years ago that my dad played with. And then he transitioned to playing bass guitar, and my mother plays piano and organ, and she was trained as she went through the process that you mentioned. And actually, my dad went through that process as well. They both started off with private lessons when they were in grade school, and then continued. And they formed a ministry group called Matthew Ministries, and it was an outreach ministry group, which basically meant they would take the gospel outdoors. They would practice a whole lot. And then certain times a year, normally when it was hot outside, they would hold events outdoors, and they would host a concert and put some food on the grill. And they would accompany the musical concert with some kind of give, some kind of tangible food, backpacks, socks, whatever they could offer to the community. And they say the year that my mother was pregnant with me was one of their busiest years. And she used to get complaints by her community about saying, you need to go sit down somewhere. So they contribute some of my playing to that period of time. I'm sure that has something to do with it. And I also think when you are around something, depending on the type of learner that you are, that I feel like I was probably picking up certain lessons. And I know that a part of it has to do with my memory, because recently, this was maybe about 2 years ago, there's like middle of the pandemic, I was talking to my mother and I mentioned a song to her. And I was like, do you remember this song? And I just sang the melody really quick. And she was shocked. I was like, I inquired why she was shocked. And she told me, yes, I do remember singing that to you. She said, I used to sing that to you all the time, but I used to sing that to you when I bathed you in a bowl. So I didn't know that. I just remembered it. So I think there's probably more to it that I'm unaware of, because I'm not a neurosurgeon or anything like that, where there may not have been formal lessons, but maybe being around it, I was maybe picking up some of those things that one would get in a more formalized lesson. And then I think it's fair to acknowledge too that I played trumpet and trombone, and that started in 5th grade. I'm going to say 8 is about 3rd grade. So even earlier on, there's some formal training in there. Not a lot. I know how to play high cross buns, but I do think that contributes to the overall impact. And then you go through the public school system. I played in jazz band and in high school, trombone, believe it or not, terrible. And I think all those things, played in a wind ensemble in middle school and in high school. So I think all those things add value to my understanding of music and how I'm able to translate. So yeah, it is largely informal, but there's a lot of formal threads through there that are as good as the public school system can be. And that respectfully, it just depends on what school you're at and who your music teacher is. And I think I was fortunate to be around really good public school teachers. Yeah, I had Mr. Vore in grade school, whom I remember. That's where I started on trumpet with. And then in middle school, I had a guy named Milton Ruffin, who is a known principal, but he's a really good musician, very strong musician with, I think, a jazz performance degree from Central State University, maybe, in middle school. And he's the one who let me play trumpet and trombone. And then by the time I got to high school, that's when I, had the likes of Jeff McCargish and Jim Maneri and Dan Tress, which was really a difference maker for me.
And that was they call that the vocational performing arts program or something like that at Fort Hays in Columbus, Ohio. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, do you think that your parents, I'm assuming your parents knew what they were doing? They were trying to facilitate and provide opportunities for you to be at the drums or be around music or something like that.
Absolutely. To a point that was uncomfortable for me. I feel myself to be pretty laid back, but I was bashful in those days, like just nervous to step out. And I remember crying a lot because my dad would really encourage me. He would go to preach somewhere. And then he would say, before I preach, I want my son to come play a drum solo. And which is kind of in that tradition, it's common to have someone would sing and then the preacher takes his scripture. And he would like have me, and I would just, I would pass out crying. And I was like, I wish I could never play. I had a hard time with that. So they were instrumental in that way because they felt like there was something there. And I know that my mother was very instrumental. Now I'm at that age now where you become friends with your parents. Right. And she was intentional about having me be in a place where Milton was and where Jim, like those were very conscious decisions on her part. And I wasn't aware because she figured I had something and I just needed like somebody to help get that flame lit in a consistent way. Was grace that taught my heart to fear
thank you for sharing that with me, because I feel like the kind of the lesson I had about it when I heard you first share that with Andy was just how I had this idea as a classically trained violinist from an early age that it's, I don't want to say that's the only way or whatever, but that it would be such a disadvantage to not have had private lessons. And I feel like now I don't believe that anymore, but I still see that there's something that's a common denominator, which is that we both had a tremendous amount of being put into spaces with music where we were encouraged to participate. And it just, that can look different, very different for different people. And I feel like it's also just fascinating to me, to hear about that experience. I wanted to, before we go into the next question about kind of the music culture and music education and that kind of thing, I wanted to see if you, or if you'd like for me to read one of your letters and to talk about, first of all, like, what is Letters of a Broken Brother? This is the name of your new record. Everybody should go look for it. Look on Bandcamp for Cedric Easton, Letters of a Broken Brother. It's an amazing album. What does it mean, Letters of a Broken Brother? Tell me about that first.
Thank you for asking about that. So for me, I think most things have, if not dual meaning, some kind of layered meaning, particularly when you're talking about music. For example, when I picked up the piano player from the airport, I told him I was sitting outside and I heard a melody, and I just sang it into my phone. And I was like, I heard this melody and I thought about, actually, it was for Milton Ruffin. And I thought about the person, and I could see them and hear them playing this melody. So I'm saying that to say, I think that when something is being designed, there are multiple spaces of influences that it's coming from. I don't think it's one thing like, oh, this is about this, because whatever that particular variable is probably layered by a number of things. Example with that I just gave from hearing the melody is, oh, I thought of a person. I thought of the melody. I thought the melody was beautiful to me. That gave me a sentiment. Thinking about the person gives me a sentiment. And then I was thinking, because all I could hear was like the first couple bars of an A section. And then he plays bass, like that's his feature instrument. And then I'm thinking like, oh, what melody would sound a certain way on a bass? Because I feel like you have this emotional content with music when you're dealing with like intervals and stuff like that. And then you have this just like a sort of sonic quality. Like intervals don't sound the same coming from an electric bass as it does a trumpet, as it does a violin. So I was thinking about that, and all of those things created this sound to me. So it's the same way with Letters from a Broken Brother. It's a composite of many different sentiments, all of which kind of emanate from my experience. It started because I was in New York, and I would have these moments in New York where, you know, how you feel like you did the right thing, but nothing seems that's happening in the moment to suggest that was the right thing. And the way I would handle that, generally for me, like, I will walk, and we've talked on the phone, and I'll walk from like Columbus Circle to Harlem, so I was walking from, I had played a session at Smalls, and it was it was really late. It was like one of those 1 a.m. sessions. That's one of the friend of mine, Jonathan.
It's one of the top jazz clubs in New York City for people that don't know.
Yes. And I left that session, and it was like, it wasn't the music. It was just like, am I out of my mind? I believe I'm supposed to be here, but this is tough. And so I walked from, in New York, you lived there for such a while. I walked from Smalls to Columbus Circle.
50 blocks.
50, yeah, because Smalls is on like around 4th and Columbus Circle is like 59th. And I called myself, I was like looking for God, because I was like, dude left me. Like, I thought you told me to come here, and you ain't here. You know what I mean? What's going on? And I was sitting on those rocks or whatever. I was like sitting on that rock. And this guy, a Hispanic gentleman, man, he was like on the phone, and he was walking past me on the phone, and I was just sitting there. And again, my sentiment was like, I'm trying to find God. I'm trying to find my purpose. What am I doing? Did I make the wrong move? This is really difficult, blah, blah, blah. And I should add, it wasn't difficult for the normal reasons that one would consider things difficult. Like I could pay my rent, had some playing opportunities. It was just like a sense of not belonging.
Wow. You felt like you
So
didn't belong in the jazz club in New York or in the city or.
I don't know if it was the city. I don't know if it was a jazz club. It was just like, man, I like the way my personality is set up and the things that I think I need to give they don't need it. Whatever I have to give, they don't need it. And I don't know what I'm supposed to receive. And like, where do I go find it? It was like I was having a hard time.
Yeah.
And a gentleman, I kid you not, he was on his phone. He walked past me. He took maybe like 3 to 5 steps. And then he stopped and then he was like, hold on. And he turned around and he looked at me and he was like, hey, buddy, I don't mean to be weird or anything like that, but I just want you to know, man, that I know you're looking for God, but I just heard God say that he's looking for you. And then he walked away.
Whoa.
Then I start sobbing. Like I just start crying. And that was like that's when I heard the first melody.
It just came up for me that remembering that you went to school for, I don't know if you call it studying religion or studying the Bible. And so it occurs to me that the meaning of quote unquote the word is also really important to you. And then maybe there's a connection with that and with your own writing. Is that true?
I definitely think it's true. It's true on a couple of different levels. On the surface, there's always a sentiment. I think being like we would call like a citizen in the kingdom or being a believer of it's like the Bible or yeah, that's how I would say it. I'm trying to figure out the way to say it because it's there's much more room than the room that's often articulated about the faith. There's a lot more perspective than people know. You grew up in a type of Christianity that taught certain kind of things that might be a little bit the type of Christian. So it's broader than what we think. So that's why I stated it like that. However, I think at the core, there's this idea that you are connected to the creator and certainly more than yourself in a community. So everything starts with that for me. So when I think of even a melody, it's a give. Mm-hmm. In the same way, if I were a chef, I would think of a dish. And what is that dish intended to do? That's the part. Like, so if I'm a citizen of this community, this kingdom, then what does my dish taste like? What is my dish for? Is this a Snickers bar? Is it grapes? So that's like the first thing that crosses my mind when I hear something. It's okay, wait, what is this for? And it's not, I don't know how that started or where that started, because it's not intentional in that way. It just comes out that way. So there is that connection point. And then there's, I don't know, sometimes I think it's if I'm presenting something to Yah, if I'm presenting something to God or a community of God people, do I dig it myself? Right. And if I don't like the sound of it, or if it doesn't make sense to me, or if it's a little jive, because when you're being jive, then why would you offer it to the community? Furthermore, if there are people who are not a part of the community, and if you think the community is worth anything, then why would you offer the community something that's no good? If you say, hey, we're going to put together a clothing drive, I'm not going to take the worst of my items from my closet and say like, man, I've been waiting for a chance to get rid of this. So it's like that kind of defeats the purpose. You want to give something of quality, something that's durable, something that may have value. You want to give that away. So when I'm thinking about melodies in particular, because I generally hear melodies first, those are the things that go through my mind. How does this represent who I am and what I'm a part of? And then how does this feel? Is it a good feeling or not?
I'm glad you brought that up, because that's one of the things that's always struck me from so many concerts that we've played over many years and just talking about music, that you always come back to talking about how does it make you feel? How does it feel? The idea of feel, which can have so many meanings. I wanted to turn the conversation towards a question about music education and culture. And I should tell people that one of the things you do currently is work full-time for Jazz at Lincoln Center as the Associate Director of Outreach Education. And you've been on that job, I believe, like close to 8 years or something like that. Is that right?
Almost nine
Yeah.
in 2 months. Yeah.
Which is a big deal for anybody that doesn't know. Jazz at Lincoln Center is a huge deal in the nonprofit world and certainly in music education. So it's a big job, and you work directly with Wynton Marsalis and all the people in that organization in New York. So you've had a lot of insight from being, quote unquote, I don't know, on the ground as a musician, doing every kind of thing imaginable, from playing touring around the world, playing in every type of like institutional and informal settings, very diverse experiences as a musician, but also been in this institutional environment of the nonprofit sector and stuff like that, visiting lots of schools and seeing it from every level. And it's partly from that context, that diverse expertise and perspective that you have from those mix of experiences, that I wanted to bring up this question. So in order to get into it, I feel like I have to lay out like my bias or like my kind of quote unquote agenda, which is that as a music educator, I come from a classical background. I grew up and later on pivoted out of the classical music world to playing in what sometimes I refer to as eclectic musical situations outside of classical, whether it's folk music, whether it's playing jazz, whether it's playing Latin music, pop music, there's many situations. And I learned, in order for me to do that, I had to learn from musicians like yourself who came from a different tradition that wasn't a classical tradition. And so then I've developed a method over 25 years where my whole goal is to help people who, like me, came out of classical training, or maybe they were taught like folk styles or self-taught or whatever, and they're missing certain quote unquote theoretical skills, like how to read changes, how to play over chords, how to improvise, and even also like how to groove and how to understand different groove needs of different situations. So I've basically created a method where I'm trying to teach people to be, broadly speaking, functional musicians. Functional, that's how I call it. Although the idea of being functional, we know, has different meanings in different situations. And I feel like part of the problem with classical music education is that it defines functional musicianship in such a limited way. It's like classical music is saying, this is the only way to play music that really is important. And a lot of people, I think, make a strong case that this is, in some cases, it's advancing the idea of white supremacism because it's holding above the Western European model of knowledge, truth, ethics, and aesthetics as being the supreme model. And it's discounting other models, which I think is completely false. And so as an educator, that's partly why I am teaching the way I am, to broaden the, quote unquote, broaden the tent. And part of that, though, is that there is a jazz studies canon. There's an Academy of Jazz Studies. And I feel that, and of course I'm a part of it and I love it, but I also feel that it has such a high barrier to entry. And not everybody wants to learn swing or the blues or Charlie Parker licks or playing 2-5-1s or all the tunes. And so by setting that high bar, we're basically keeping people out of it because people are going to give up. They're never going to get to smalls, let alone even like a neighborhood club, like even be able to play whatever, because they're not even interested in it in the first place. And then on top of that, it's hard. And so instead I'm saying, no, people need a bridge. Give them like a pop tune they can groove on. Give them a fiddle tune, but you can still teach like groove. You can still teach harmony. You can still teach improvisation. And so I said that to you the other day, and I'm sorry that this is such just me.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
This is all to get like your perspective, because I feel like there's a tension with what I'm suggesting and the idea that may exist for some people in the jazz world, which is we don't want to give up jazz. We don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, or I'm not sure the right analogy, but and so I just wondered do you feel that there's a tension with that? Do you feel that there's a problem with that? This tension between wanting to promote jazz versus wanting to promote a broader sense of functional musicianship as a bridge to building a larger tent, which then could bring more people to jazz eventually. I'll shut up now.
No, it's fine. I think I would like to start off by saying you're stating your bias. My bias is that I'm not an authority on this matter. I'm around the conversation quite a great deal. I try to do as much listening as humanly possible by the elders and those who have really given to the music, given to jazz specifically, much as I would anyone who had given to fiddle music. So I'm purely providing a perspective that I do not think is right and that I do not think is an authority. It's just a perspective. So I will say that. Awesome. It's a complex issue because even as I'm listening to you speak, for me, if I'm going to, let's say, dismantle something, which I think there are moments where that's necessary. Or I even like the words that you said when you said providing a bridge, which those are two different ideas, but I understand what you're saying. A point of entry for folks. The number one thing that I would want to do that work for those who are interested. It's the number one group I want to work for. In fact, as with my position at Jazz Lincoln Center, I'm in South Carolina right now because I'm traveling to HBCUs, historical Black colleges and universities, to their jazz band programs. And we are mentoring jazz bands with workshops, master classes, the whole 9 yards. And it's connected to a larger piece biannual jazz festival held in Virginia. Even that has parameters, right? Almost every HBCU that I'm aware of has a band because marching band to the culture of HBCUs is huge. Mm-hmm. They don't all have jazz programs.
Right.
So for me, when doing this work, I have to target the spaces that I know want entry, that want access. And then I would say that for those individuals, I have a job to do to help them gain that access. But that does not necessarily mean dismantling the identity of the music itself. And I'm going to be very specific, but that's where I'm starting. So I'll break that down. As a drummer, if I'm working with other drummers and those drummers want to play the swing beat, there's no way I'm going to play Parliament Funkadelic for them, although I like Parliament Funkadelic. There's no way I'm going to play James Brown for them, although I like James Brown. Because there's already a body of work that we have collectively decided this is what makes up this swing beat. So if I'm going from Baby Dodds to Brian Blade, man, it's about 100, that's a lot of work and people who put their lives like down entirely. And there's a lot, when you get into the history of it, there's a lot of context for when I say people put down their lives, I literally mean that. So for me, it would be strange and I think slightly dismissive, if not disrespectful, if not belligerently disrespectful, to dismantle that so that individuals who don't even want to play the swing beat, drummers who don't even want to play the swing beat, will come check out Lewis Nash or my buddy Ulysses Owens, or you don't want to listen to this anyway. You don't want to play this, you know? So I say that story to say that there are a lot of people who have no interest in the music at all. And do I think it's proper to dismantle anything for those individuals? Not at all. Not in the least bit, because you don't want to participate in this, which is okay. I don't fly planes. I ride in them. I don't want to learn how to fly a plane. I've been a nervous wreck, but I'm going to let those guys, I'm going to let them do their thing. So that's one perspective. Yeah. Does a person want entry to this? If they do, let's go. I find that the community is exceptionally rich and open and giving to those who want to be a part of it. Here's where it gets funky. You see a person's heart, in my mind, when you realize it's more than the music that they're after. So some people may say they don't have access to it because they can't call a Christian Howells and talk Bird, or they can't call a Wynton Marsalis and talk Lee Morgan, right? But they have someone in their neighborhood who could help them understand what Bird's dealing with, help them understand what Lee Morgan is, but that's not good enough. So sometimes I come across people who they want like the prestige or the space or the stage, but it's not really the music. And I find the jazz community at large a very giving community, because it's so small. Like nobody's really trying to hide anything. Sometimes a person may have an experience, say at a jazz club with someone. And I wouldn't validate a negative experience. If it's a negative, it's always been a jerk. I don't care who they are. They could be the baddest cat in the world. If they've been a jerk, that's messed up and they shouldn't be a jerk. However, I will say sometimes if you're in a space, you don't know what another person's day is like. So you don't know what you're encountering, right? They could be going through a divorce, but they got to go work and play that show. Then you come up and you're talking to them and you're disrespecting the personal space. Because in that setting, like I'll compare it to the concert that I went to. And I want to say the artist because it's really big, but I don't also want to, I don't want to dime anybody out. There's security. You can't get to the stage. You can't touch their instrument. You can't walk up to the person, just have a conversation. Like you cannot do that. Right. And I went back in the green room area and stuff. Their room is on the completely opposite side of even the band. Like the band can't even walk up to the artist and say, "How was your day today?" But in a jazz club, no matter what a person is going through, any person can walk up and touch their cymbal and say, "Oh man, that sounded great." Yeah. Who would do that at the Met? Right. So I think the familial sort of spaces, or the quaint spaces even, that the musicians have to serve in, it has an impact on the kind of interactions that the jazz musician may have. Yeah. Again, I'm not validating a negative experience, but I think that there's room for us to have empathy for the negative experiences. Yeah. So again, if a person wants access and entry, I think they should get it. And I would dare say 9 times out of 10, if you go up to a jazzer, as I say jokingly, even if they're not a player, man. So I've been traveling. Most of the time I wear this shirt. Mm-hmm. It's really comfortable. I really like it. Every city I go to, there's somebody at TSA, there's a flight attendant, and it never fails. And most of the time, they don't look like what you think they would look like. You know what I'm saying? Man, I love that. Man, oh, Miles was just boom all the time. So what my experience has been, again, I didn't go to college for music. I didn't have those formal lessons. All of my stuff was records. And it would be people in the community, the Judy Schaefers of the world, who I consider a friend of mine, who's, older than my mother, respectfully, white woman from middle class, well-to-do, who are friends, and we can go listen to music together. There's no one. So I'm just using her, shout out Judy, as an example. I just had dinner with her literally like a month ago. It was at our house, me and her. I don't think the jazz community is that restrictive. I think that there's a position that some people want in the jazz community. And when they don't get it as soon as they want it, now they have a problem. But it's not the music that you were interested in. And it's not the culture that you were interested in, because there's a cultural perspective too. Like I said, I just had dinner with Judy. That's an event. You got to go, you got to sit down. There's no cell phones. There's no computer. It slows down. If you want to play like Bird or play like that, you got to slow it. You got to take your time. I remember a great friend of mine, I call him my big brother, one of my musical mentors, Eddie Bayer. He told me I was like 19 or 20. And he was like, it's going to start making sense around 30.
Right.
He said, just keep playing. It's going to make sense around 30. He said this for so long. I was just like, oh my God, do I have to suck for 10 whole years? That's what I was thinking at that time. But now I think it doesn't matter. Like the work is the reward. That's the way that this music works. So I will say those two things in sort of defense of the jazz community. And again, I want to be very clear. I am not validating a negative experience. I am just stating that sometimes we have a negative experience and forget that the person, like they're as human as we are, and they may have as bad a day as we have. But what I find overall, if you want to learn about jazz and you want to learn like that canon, most of the time there's a lot of people who will extend themselves if you come correct. But if you come talking about line arrays and about how you just made a bunch of money doing this, or what I would say culturally, no taste, just culturally disrespectful. I'm here to tell you that would happen in any community that you're part of. I used to play double kick rock. I guarantee if I showed up to the gig with a 4-piece, 18-inch bass drum, and some K-Cons, and those dudes are gonna, before we even get started, it's like a problem.
Yeah.
There's no hole in your kick drum. Like, we're gonna have a problem. It's every community. So I think that sometimes the jazz community gets a little bit of a bad name based on that. But as it pertains to just pure access and entry, I struggle with that a little bit, only because I think that community is very giving, very generous. Think of persons like yourself with Bobby Floyd. To me, the jazz community is one community that will, like, you could go over the house and listen to records and get a lesson, not pay a dime, and even functioning in the room. I guess I'm saying this because I play various languages of music or whatever. It's not that way in all of them. I'm just saying. Yeah. It's not as familial and down to earth. When you can walk up to a Johnny O'Neill and have a conversation, and he's not going to be like, if you're talking about the music, I walked up to Roy Hargrove. He don't know me from Adam. Like, he did. And I was like, hey man, why are you down at these sessions? Because he sat in with the band that I was playing with. And he's Roy Hargrove. He's killing. Yeah. I just talked to him afterwards, and I was like, hey, Mr. Hargrove, can I ask you a question? Man, we talked about Red Garland's band for 40-some minutes, man. He was doing the talk, I was doing the listening. But the fact remains, he didn't owe me that. Yeah. Those are the kind of interactions that I think are more common in the community, but those things don't go viral. You know? People don't spread those. So if anyone wants to learn the music, I guarantee, I would say find the eldest person in your city that knows how to play the music better than you. You will be shocked. They will like you more than, maybe more than you like them. And you will get invited to the house for all the things. So that's.
I'm correct, especially, right? Great. Thank you for that perspective. That's very helpful. And I'm curious what you think of it, like a concrete, practical musicianship level. What I find with a lot of the musicians that I encounter, again, this could be they came from a folk fiddle perspective or they came from a classically trained perspective, is that they don't have what I would call universal skills to be able to understand the form of a song and seek out a functional thing to do on that song from the perspective of different chairs in the band. And so, in other words, can you accompany and play the chords in some way that fits with the groove? Can you keep a consistent groove and try to understand a way that's in keeping with the quote unquote clave in a loose way, that's not stepping all over the groove? Can you find a way to write your own part in a song? Can you just be a cool musician on the gig that's not stepping on everybody? These are the kinds of skills that I find are missing for a lot of the musicians that I'm helping with. And so again, I'm saying that to me, it feels like a very universal level, because if you go into the jazz world, you have to do all those things, but you have to do it in a way that's specific to jazz and in many ways has more levels of complexity and specificity. And so I'm not disagreeing with anything that you just said. I think it's beautiful what you just said, but I wonder what you think about all of that and if it's useful, and also if it could be because it was a bridge for me to jazz. Like I got in, like playing rock and roll first and then playing in a blues band and then playing in churches, like all these things, first of all, introduced me to those concepts. And then from there, I actually heard Wynton's like sextet play out in an open air, like small environment, Eastern Music Festival or something like that one day. And I remember it really touched me. And then later on, like David Murray, like really touched me. So there were things specific to the jazz world that then brought me in, but I feel like I wouldn't have been ready for it. And certainly when I first heard jazz, it was so unfamiliar to me that I was like, so I feel like there's a lot of people that aren't interested in jazz, but if they came a little, son wasn't interested in sushi. One day he tries something that's like palatable to him, and then he gets to become a sushi aficionado. So I'm curious what you think about any of that, just like repositioning the question around that. And I appreciate your defending the culture of jazz. And and what I'm hearing from you is it is important to defend and promote and grow that community because it has its own many important things about it. But I'm curious is there anything else you would say based on what I just shared? And also from your standpoint as a practicing musician, because the way you learned music was different than the way I learned music. But we both came to, in some ways, similar concepts of well-rounded musicianship, although we're very different musicians. But yeah, anything you would say after hearing all that?
For sure. I think that what you said, the variables you laid out about dealing with groove, understanding song form, and being able to have relationships between what's happening with what you're hearing and hearing. When I think of a song form, I really think about that, or that's what comes to mind for me. The number one thing is to be patient with yourself and your process. It doesn't matter. Myself and the keyboard player, there's a guy named Kenny Banks Jr., who is certainly worth listening to, audience, if you get a chance to check him out. Both of us have similar upbringing in music. In fact, our parents even know one another. We come from the same city. He's a few years younger than I am. And we were having a conversation earlier today about being gifted, as it were. The reality is you have to practice for a long period of time, generally, to express what you are feeling or hearing. And to me, the practice part is not the part. The patience part of the practice, that's the part.
Wow.
And one has to be willing to not concern yourself with the destination. In my mind, it's just, I'm on a path. I did not grow up with jazz. My parents did not play jazz. Like, they don't even understand my connection. And not just jazz, world music in general, because I'm into quite a great deal.
Oh, yeah.
But it takes time. And I think if a person can embrace, again, that middle, that process, and be okay with it versus wanting to be somebody or wanting to do a thing, to me, that's a sweet spot. That's a general consideration, right? Because I'm one who believes that the musician, the practitioner, can practice something that they don't even perform just because they want to, just because they enjoy it. I don't know the harm in that. I think it's beautiful, and it may enrich the other thing that that you are engaging in, but it might not. What if it doesn't? It's okay. I think it would, but even if not, it's okay. I think the music itself is worth it. So the main thing when I'm hearing you say that is be patient with yourself and also be kind to yourself. Yes, it's going to sound bad for very long periods of time. And sincerely, like my experience is the moment, like I may have a goal in mind and I say, okay, I want to accomplish whatever the musical goal is. Yeah. And let's say I'm right here. By the time I'm like right here, I feel like whatever this was is so far from me. And by the time I get here, I don't even want this anymore. Like I'm not thinking about it. It's, oh, okay, I can hear that now. I can see that. So to me, it's be kind to yourself because you will get it.
Totally. I see that all the time. And I think there's a lot of assumptions we make when we develop expertise in one domain. And then we think, okay, so this means I'm just a great musician. And I think a lot of people have this assumption that it's like, if they can play, they're a great classical musician. They're like, I've learned all the things. I'm done. I'm a great musician. And so then if I wanted to go do this other thing, jazz or improvise in a fiddle group, that's going to be easy for me, which also, unfortunately, contributes to a sense of like condescension and entitlement.
Absolutely.
In these other spaces. I feel like we agree on a lot about like how musical practice, musical engagement it's parallel to our human, personal, maybe spiritual development, because as you said, it's like always checking our ego and constantly humbling because it's just so expansive. I think you and I are both really, quote unquote, we have eclectic tastes. I think we both share that in common. And I think that is one thing that I want for a lot of my students and a lot of people, especially in the classical world where I come from originally, is I want for them to see the virtue of being more well-rounded musicians and not to be on this high horse that they're in this one community and that they're getting all the information. It's like, you're not getting all the information. And I feel like there's a parallel in society. You know, it's like we can all be more well-rounded by just getting a little more educated in different quote unquote domains. But it sounds like we both agree on that as well.
Absolutely.
I agree that right now is a real crux moment for that, for questioning things that we've been holding on to, and any of us in our country, and being like having some conversations. I was just thinking this feels like actually natural to our conversation here, because it just occurred to me that number one, you should have podcasts, but number two, but number two, if you don't have a podcast, I was thinking like I should just do more episodes where I just ask you questions. But like we can bring guests on and we can have like episodes where we both ask them questions, you know, because
cool.
I feel it feels really good to me to have these conversations with you, because I learn a lot from it and I feel like comfortable enough in my own skin having the conversation with you about these things. And I'm just grateful for that.
Definitely. Yeah.
And that takes time too. We've known each other for a long time. So even things that I could talk about with you now, I might not have felt as comfortable talking with you about 10 years ago or whatever, but that's a testament to the growth process. Cause I think the relationships create that growth too, and that history. And I'm just speaking for myself. I feel gratitude for having that, my personal growth in relationship to the marker of our relationship, and having had so many conversations And just the difference that I feel being able to have conversations with you now, like the trust that I feel to be able to just say what I think. I'm grateful for that. And so I guess in communities, like talking about going to the jazz community, going into other communities, that feels like a parallel of that too. Like we're all afraid when we go into other communities, when we have conversations, right? I don't know. What do you think about? Do you agree with that or?
Absolutely. I think that the fear is one of it's so interesting because I was talking to Kenny Banks about this. It's like your mind will play tricks on you before anything happens. And I gave the example, we're eating some omelets or whatever. And I was like, we're in Columbia, South Carolina. And I'm still, every time I think about the Carolinas, I keep thinking about those dudes in North Carolina. I was like, oh, it's just a bear. All you gotta do is make yourself big. You know? I'm like, you're crazy. No way. And I had someone sharing that with Ken. And I was like, the thing is, what your mind, said persons might be accurate. A bear could walk in here and the bear could have no teeth, no claws. And you don't even know that. The moment you see the bear, the thought that's in your mind is, I'm out of here. And quick. I'm out of here. So you never know what that exchange would be.